remind me if you'll be so kind. Staring out into space, asking God to hear my case. Trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last? The purple angel, purple angel, purple angel, you're next to me.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm also a daughter who has felt the pain, the disconnection, the exhaustion when caring for a loved one with dementia. You see, my mom had dementia for 30 years. Luckily, I was blessed enough to find the joy, the love, and the lessons that come along with that journey, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything. So that's really why I created Alzheimer Speaks, was to help others connect to services, products, and tools and stories that you can relate to and that can give you hope and help you through this journey by learning lessons that many of us have learned along the way. And I also need to just give a shout out to our followers. Your likes, your clicks, your shares, they're immeasurable. And they have spread the word of our resource. And I just want to thank you all so much. And again, invite you to maybe one day be a guest on the show. All you have to do is reach out to me, and you can contact me through alzheimerspeaks.com. There's a big contact button. That's our main website there. So please feel free to do that. Now, before we get into our conversation today, which is going to be really interesting, it's about kind of caring and coping as a working daughter. And we have Liz O'Donnell with us, who is the author of her new book that we're going to be speaking about. But before I introduce her, I just want to give a shout out to a couple of, I think, really important things that are going on. One is the Traveling with Dementia Airport Survey. It's something that a group I'm participating with here in Roseville, Minnesota, and the University of Minnesota have put together. And it's a survey that can be used internationally, but we're really trying to gather data on airport travel for people living with dementia and their travel companions. You can find that, again, right on our homepage at alzheimerspeaks.com. There are also couple other resources on the homepage that I want to point out to you. One is a webinar series that Jennifer Fitzpatrick is doing on her book called Cruising Through Caregiving. And she still has a couple more sessions left on that. And then the third thing that I want to shout out to is Stall Catchers, which is a game where you can actually play a game and analyze real-life Alzheimer's data. And you're making incredible difference by playing this game, and I would really urge you to check that out. It's simple and easy to do. So let's go ahead and get started today, and let me introduce you to Liz so that we can have this conversation on caring and coping as a working daughter. Liz O'Donnell is the founder of Working Daughter, which is a community for women balancing elder care, career, and more. She's an award-winning writer and recently published her second book, Working Daughter, A Guide to Caring for Your Aging Parents While Earning a Living. Isn't that what we all seem to fall into that boat so often, trying to find that balance? Liz is a former family caregiver and a recognized expert on working while caregiving, and she has written on this topic for many outlets like The Atlantic, Forbes, Time, and PBS, and even Next Avenue. So welcome to the show today, Liz. I'm thrilled to have you with us.
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so happy you call attention to this topic. Thank you.
Well, I think it's one so many people are balancing. I know when I was caring for basically both my mom and dad, I was that working woman, trying to figure out, how do I raise my own family, keep my career, care for my parents, and do it all at a high level. And there's a lot of guilt and stress and exhaustion, I think, that can that can wrap and confuse us there. So before we get started talking about the book, I always like to just have you tell our audience if you've been personally touched by a family member or somebody within your circle of friends who's living with dementia.
Yes, my father had dementia. He passed away 2 years ago, actually, just about 2 years ago. And for a long time, it was early stage and, just minor things. And then when it kicked in, it was one of the toughest things that I experienced was watching him, go through that disease.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask what were maybe the top two things that were the most difficult for you in that experience?
Well, my father, the disease displayed with aggression sometimes, and he would be placed in adult psych wards. That happened 2 different times. And the care there wasn't care, it was sort of maintenance, right? Wait until the patient shifts and they can go back to their assisted living or the nursing home. And my understanding now of the disease is that every day can be different. So, he might have had a good day and then come in to reassess whether or not he could go home, and then he was having a bad day and the cycle would start again. And I knew he was in the wrong place, and I turned into such a warrior. What I feel great about on the other side is that I loved so hard when he was sick, to make sure that he was being taken care of, to get him back to the nursing home that I had found for him where the staff was fantastic. They embraced their patients on the memory care units. They understood how to deal with dementia. And so there were a lot of positives I took out of the experience. But to see somebody who, my father, World War II, greatest generation, stubborn, independent, and to see him losing the ability to do things he loved to do was hard. The great experience that I had, you talk about your mother's experience and how you were able to find some great lessons of love and joy in there. The one thing that I'm so, so grateful for was that I was able to shift from grieving the father that I had to loving the father that I had in the moment. And even though most visits as the disease progressed, he thought I was either his mother, his sister, or the woman who ran the place, he did know that he knew me and that he liked me, and we were able to still have a fantastic relationship, and it didn't matter that he didn't know specifically who I was.
Oh, that's beautiful. I got to that spot too, and I kind of tell people it's like an unconditional love you didn't know existed, because it's almost at a spiritual level that you get to. It's so peaceful and it's so calming. It's like, why the heck didn't I find this sooner? Why didn't somebody tell me this even existed to look for it? I was kind of oblivious to it all. But once you're there, it's pretty magnificent. Well, thank you for sharing that with our audience. I think it's always helpful. Why don't you tell us why you decided to write the book, Working Daughter, A Guide to Caring for Your Aging Parents While Earning a Living?
Well, I had written a book about balancing motherhood. My first book was called Mogul Mom and Maid: The Balancing Act of the Modern Woman, and talked about there's data that shows that women tend to do more housework and chores and childcare than men, regardless of whatever the marital arrangement is or who's working and who's not. And I had written a book about that, and just as that book came out, my parents started to need more and more. And I had this aha moment. It was a day that started at 5. I answered some emails for work. I drove the hour and 15 minutes to where my parents lived to take my mother to the doctor. She wasn't ready. I had to push the appointment back. Then, it's get the prescriptions, take her to lunch. My dad needed help with his computer. Get back in the car, drive home, happen to drive over a big branch. So at one point I'm on the side of the road trying to fix the car. Anyway, that night I was speaking to a group of young mothers about the challenges of balancing childcare and career. So a day that started at 5 ended about 11 o'clock that night. I'm finally driving home, and I thought, what about I was just talking about working mothers. What about the working daughters? Look how hard it is to balance all of this stuff. And everybody's talking about how to help mothers. Nobody is talking about how to help me, a working daughter. And that's when I became sort of obsessed with the topic. Like, whoa, this is as challenging and challenging in different ways than motherhood, I need to talk to somebody. So I started to write what didn't exist for me, and then other people started to talk to me, and then you realize how much of a need there was for us all to be able to say, I'm going through this too. This is normal. How do you manage? And it just went from there.
Oh wow, that's really what happened to me with Alzheimer Speaks too. I started as a blog, not really knowing what would come of it. It was like, holy cow, what a shockaroo! You know, everybody's struggling out there, and nobody's connecting, right. and you're just kind of taken back. And what a difference just having a conversation can make, you know, by writing a book or a radio show or a group meeting or, you know, whatever it is. It makes such a powerful difference in people's lives that we just, I don't know, I think we're so busy we forget to slow down and say, hey, I can't be the only one going through this. There's got to be others. And we can learn so many beautiful things from one another. So thank you for taking the time and having the revelation to see that, the perception, and then to move forward with it. Kudos to you. How can we better support a working daughter? And they always look like they have everything under control. I think so many people view them and go, wow, they're really doing good. You know, we seem to put on a good face. And so how do we support them, or is it putting on that good face even part of the problem that we have?
I think it is part of the problem, and yet I completely understand why we do it. And, you know, this comes up in the working daughter community all the time. There's a private Facebook group where working daughters really tell their truth and lean on each other. And one of the things that comes up is that people think we're okay. And, you know, you can't imagine how stressed out or lonely or whatever it might be. And, of course, you know, it's not all the time, but you have your days. So I think the fact that we do try to cover it up or, you know, get through the day as best we can, people don't realize. And that was one of the, you know, impetuses back to writing the book was I felt so alone going through this experience. But, you know, somebody in the next office or the next cube might be going through it too. You just don't see it. But I understand why we do it. It is scary to, especially if you're talking about the working daughter, you know, who works outside the home, it is a scary proposition to say and let work know, hey, my personal life is impacting my ability to focus at work, to show up at work, to advance my career. You don't want to say that and then risk, you know, being passed over or being viewed on, you know, you hear about the mommy track. I mean, potentially there could be a daughter track, right? Well, we can't rely on Liz because she might get that call at any moment. So I think how can we better support working daughters? We can talk about it and we can normalize it. You know, the data is pretty overwhelming that we have 10,000 people turning 65 every day for a whole host of reasons, from immigration to just the volume of care and training and pay, that we're going to see a shortage of professional paid caregivers. So that work is going to continue to fall to adult children, right? Somebody is going to have to take care of our rapidly aging society, and it's looking like the data is showing that it's going to be adult daughters and sons. And so we better normalize this at work. And so what is it that we're doing for working parents, and is there a parallel? Should we be having, you know, meetups at work where people can get together and talk about examples? Should we be looking at our culture, and do we still operate a business that is, you know, I need to see you, line of sight. If you're not in your chair and we're not all in the same room, then we can't work together. That's not the reality anymore. Can we shift the hours that people work? It's really talking about what's going on with my employee base. Where are they in the continuum of care? Because it is a continuum. I mean, look at you, 30 years. And what is it that they best need? Not assuming that we know what they need, but asking them what they need.
Yeah, those are really great insights. And I think, you know, one of the things that I love that you mentioned was, you know, the numbers are going to rise, and this isn't going away. We don't have enough people to care, so it is going to fall back to the family, and it's going to fall back to the family on multiple levels. not just the daughters, but the sons and the grandchildren even, and in neighbors and friends. This is where we're at right now. And so we need to talk, we need to say this is a normal part of living life, is supporting one another, and it shouldn't be looked down on because anybody, you can be sitting in a boardroom, anybody in that boardroom could get an emergency call. It could change
Right.
their life in a second. And then there's no going back. And you shouldn't have to go back. We should be able to support people through this, and like you said, allow some more flexibility. But I agree wholeheartedly that we have to have the conversation. Nothing ever changes without a conversation, and that doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with it. But that's how we come up with the best ideas, is to see what are people's needs, and everybody's are going to be a little bit different, and it's not going to change overnight, but we can make little progress here and there by having the conversation, by igniting the fire, by making people aware of this issue. And to me, one of the biggest issues with this is that there's almost a shame blame thing going on, and not shame on you for caring for somebody, because most people wouldn't be bold enough to say that,
Right.
But
right.
it's kind of a blame thing. Oh, you didn't get this done because of that. You didn't get this done because of that. And it could have been something totally different, where the team wasn't effective, or somebody didn't get me my information, so I didn't get it done. It had nothing to do with me caring for a loved one, but that's the first thing that gets blamed. And once the cat's kind of out of the box on that. And so I think there has to be some real good cautionary things in terms of how do we support healthy living? How do we let people be their whole self and be productive, and not just their area of work? Because you can't, as much as we say we separate work and home life, it's pretty much impossible.
Yeah, they're not
because
separate. They're not separate.
But there's this belief that there should, people should be able to, and put that smile on no matter how bad your day was at home, and pretend. And then we get that whole Stepford Wives thing going on, and then we wonder why people can't figure out when something's wrong with us, because we have learned how to hide it so well, and that's not healthy for anybody, because then
Right.
we're as a daughter, we're thinking, why don't they know? And they're thinking, what the heck, something's wrong, but I can't figure out what, because they're getting mixed messages. And then everyone's walking on eggshells. No one really wants to talk about it, because by then it's really almost in a crisis state, it seems like, before it, before answers really come forth. And then it's too late. There's so much damage, I think, done on both sides of the aisle on that. So I love the idea of being able to have support groups, or even some elder care. I know some companies have talked about doing that, like they do for daycare for children, or assisting maybe with mobile devices, so that somebody can check on somebody, or have some breaks or something. I don't know. I love that idea of spirit of conversation, and seeing where it goes. Now, working daughters, I think, often suffer from a ton of guilt. How do you dump that? How do you deal with that? Because that's, I think when we stretch ourselves so far trying to be super mom, super daughter, super worker bee, whatever, we're not good at anything, because we're so split, and yet still trying to do it all. How do we get over that guilt, and still be the best we can be?
Yeah, the guilt in this community is amazing, and I get it. There is never an end to the work, or the care, I should say. There's never an end to what needs to be done. So I understand where it stems from. We are, and I don't know that a lot of people realize this, how much caregivers do, right? We help with assisted daily living, right? We help with bathing and dressing and food. We run errands. We sort medications. That's a big responsibility, to make sure that you're giving the right doses. But what I don't think people understand is we're also, changing colostomy bags and cleaning wounds. And I mean, it's surprising once you start to realize it or experience it yourself how much the caregiver does, from medical tasks to financial tasks to sorting through legal tasks, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're so busy doing all of those things, you run out of time to then take care of your parents' social needs. And we know isolation and loneliness is a big deal in the aging community, or a big issue in the aging community. And so I understand where the guilt comes from. I only have so many hours in a day. I work full time. I have children. I have an elderly parent to care for. I only have about 4 hours next Saturday, to go check on them and visit them. If they need errands, and I go over to their place and see that they need the fridge cleaned out, or, who knows what, or they want me to look at the mail they got that week and help them, well, there goes that 4 hours, and I didn't have any time with them just to be their daughter, or to play a game of cards, or to say, hey, can I drive you over to see your friend? So the guilt comes from the fact that we wish we were doing more. We always want to be able to do more for our parents. I think the way you get over it is a couple of things. One is that guilt is misdirected. We should be angry at the lack of systems in place to support us and to support our aging society. It's not, we're the ones showing up, right? We're the ones showing up to help them, so we shouldn't be upset with ourselves that we can't do more than we already are. So I think it's a choice to redirect that guilt and to tell yourself you're showing up, and to focus on what you're doing right versus what you're doing wrong. And that's the other thing. I think it's a choice not to feel guilty. It's active work to say, hey, I'm not going to go to bed tonight thinking about all the things I did wrong. I'm going to go to bed tonight thinking of all the things I did right. I showed up, I did the errands, I cared, I'm concerned, et cetera, et cetera. And to tell yourself, I will never feel bad for putting my family first, and I'll never feel bad for earning a living. Because that's the other thing. There's no shame in the fact that we all need to work, and women are projected to live longer, and aging costs money. And so we want to continue to put money in our bank accounts so that we are set up for our retirement. And so never feel guilty that, hey, I'm not at mom's house because I'm at work. And likewise, I'm never going to feel guilty leaving work because mom needs me. And that's a choice every day. But it takes mental training.
Yeah, and how do you get that mental training? I mean, when you're so exhausted. Anyways, I know for me, there were times I wasn't even thinking straight because I was just so exhausted from, feeling guilty and feeling like I wasn't the best me or the best daughter, and, that whole 9 yards. So how do you learn to make that shift?
Well, I think a couple things. One is to find a community, and that's why, you emphasize this and I emphasize this, that conversation is so important. When we start to talk about caregiving, then we start to normalize caregiving. When we put a name on things, then we can identify them and find others who are caregivers. And I think if we have a support group, and whether that's you join an online community like Working Daughter, you join an in-person support group at, the local senior center or your church or wherever it might be, to find other people who can be kinder to you than you're being to yourself. It's funny, I see this all the time in the Facebook community as well, in the Working Daughter group. Somebody says, I just lost my temper, or I should have gone to visit Dad this Saturday, but I just couldn't get off the couch. I needed to rest. I'm a terrible person, And then all the other women in the community jump in there and say, no, you're not. Self-care is important. You need to take a break. You're doing all these things well. And then 2 days later, they're the ones saying the same thing about themselves and the person who felt guilty the day before, right? Because you're so much more generous to other people in your thought process than you are to yourself. So I think if you're in a support group, whether that's online, whatever it might be, listening to a show like this, then you say, oh, yeah, you're right. Why am I so hard on myself? I should be good to myself. And then I try to remind people every day at the end of their day to look in the mirror and thank themselves. And people think I'm crazy at first, but sometimes no one's thanking you, and you need to know that you're doing caregiving because it's who you want to be, not because you're expecting anyone to feel good about it or, thank you for it. And so I think if we just make a bedtime practice of looking in the mirror and saying, you rock, Laurie. You showed up today. And I'm going to go to bed with that as my last thought, as opposed to tomorrow's to-do list or the thing I didn't get to today. You know, build it into your bedtime routine or first thing in your morning routine, whatever works for you.
Yeah, I think that is really smart, kind of those intentions. And you're so right when you said the women will come and say, no, you did great. But they do it to themselves. You know,
Right.
It's so much easier to lift someone else up than it is yourself. Because, you know, I think we're our own worst critic. And then we have our inner critic who even trumps us, you know, telling us what a schmuck we are and we can do better. And sometimes you got to listen to that inner critic and say, heard ya, hit the road, Jack. I did the best I could with the energy and the time that I had. And, you know, maybe I can do better next time. I will try, but that's all I had in me, and I gave it all. You know, and it's not healthy to give it all away. We've got to be able to, you know, find that balance and be able to get refilled. I know that was one of my biggest mistakes, was I was giving so much to everybody else. My soul got empty, you know, and and then you just feel lost and even more exhausted. So you've got to find those things that fill you, because then you can be a better care partner, a better worker bee, whatever role you're in, you will be more whole with that. And I think that's absolutely a critical piece. Why is it, and what can be done to kind of elevate our ability to say, job well done, you know, sleep well tonight, you did good. How, you know, I know you mentioned some groups and looking yourself in the mirror. Are there any other suggestions that you have for people on that?
I'm a big believer in gratitude practices. And a few years ago, before I went through caregiving, I probably would have rolled my eyes if somebody was like, oh, I live and die by my gratitude practice. But to the point you were just making about when you give and give and give, and then you start to, you know, feel depleted, or, you know, you don't remember who you were or what brought you joy. I think it's important to remember that when we get to that point, and I got to that point so many times, do not get me wrong, I got to that point so many times, I became awful to everybody around me. I think the polite word I'm looking for is I got really cranky, but, you know, there's a less polite word that I would describe myself when, you know, when I was just doing everything I thought I should be doing for other people and go, and feeling kind of victimized by it. I was cranky to my mother. I was cranky to my husband. I was cranky to my kids. And I didn't even like me, you know. So by sort of taking a step back and realizing I wasn't really helping anybody, then that started to help. And when I was in that really sort of victimized, cranky place, I just said to myself, like, this is uncomfortable. How do I snap out of this? And I started simply by setting the timer on my iPhone to 1 minute and forcing myself every morning to say, for 1 minute, list everything that you're grateful for. And sometimes it was the fact that I woke up alive, right? Another, you know, or it was coffee, or it was my favorite color, red, or it was Sauvignon Blanc, right? And then sometimes it was like, oh, you know, my job is going well, or I have healthy kids, you know, so it could get deep or it could get really simple, like a new pair of shoes. But again, it was training and forcing myself to go, okay, there are good things in your life. There's always something good. You're stuck at the doctor's office and you're waiting. And for me, you know, I hate to be kept waiting, and I tend to be punctual, and I'll never understand why doctors run late. And I could get myself so worked up, you know, the pulse quickens and the tension around my heart. And then I couldn't continue to live that way. So I'd say to myself, okay, what's good in this moment? What's good in this moment is I can just sit and relax and talk to Dad in this waiting room. I don't have time to go back and sit with him in his apartment, so use the time now. And always training myself to find something good and to be thankful for something. Like I said, at one point I thought that was spiritual, goofy. I was way too practical. And then at some point it became necessary.
Oh, I I can so relate to that because I was there too. It was like, that's a little woo-woo-y, Of course, life is good, but I don't have to say it all the time. I don't have to think about it. Well, why the heck don't you? Well, that's a much better place to be than whining all the time or feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. I mean, when you are conscious about looking for the good, you'll find it. But when you're conscious about everything being overwhelming and, you turn into that Debbie Downer that none of us want to be. And so there's huge value in terms of finding those small, precious things. If it's just, you know what, I didn't get an emergency call, or I didn't get a repetitive call, or it's just quiet. I like the quiet, because you're going so much. And so I think it really helps put into perspective what is important in life and what do you want more out of. And the more you look for it, the more you'll find of that too. And for me, it helped me realize I was putting kind of the hammer to my own head with time frames that didn't really need to hold true, but they were adding pressure to my life. And I'm like, well, ding dog, you set the timeline, and then I realized it really didn't have to be that strict, or it really wasn't a need. It was something that maybe I thought was a need, but to them it wasn't. And really learning to prioritize. Okay, if I'm caring for them, this isn't about my list. This is about what's important to them. And I think that alone is a huge shift too, in terms of the conversation and how you approach things, and learning to be a little bit more accepting of things that might not be up to your standard, but they're survivable. I think of when I was younger, they used to call me the white tornado because I cleaned like a crazy woman. And not so much anymore, And
well, it's going to be there tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's like it's just not as important to me. Because some of the stuff I think we do out of we do it because we're worried what other people will say if we don't meet their standards. So not only is it our parents' standards and our standards, now it's our friends and family and society standards. And we have these all ticked up, and we don't even, I think, consciously know that we're doing it. But then when you step back and go, holy crap, I don't need to. This is not important to them. It's not important to me. This is our relationship. I have a right to stand up and fight for our relationship, not what everybody else thinks it should be. It makes a huge, huge difference. What are some of the biggest challenges you see with dementia caregivers? The things that they face, because they're in some ways different a lot, but again, a lot of similarities to caring for. I don't care if it's kids or somebody with cancer, caring can be caring, but there are some definite differences, I think, with dementia as well. So what are some of those challenges that you see that are a little bit different with dementia?
The biggest challenge I see is lack of education and understanding. I know in my case, and I see this with the working daughters I talk to on a daily basis, your parent is diagnosed and you're sent home. And maybe your parents put on, was it Aricept or whatever that drug is that's supposed to slow the memory loss. But that's it. Gone. Bye-bye. You're at home. And, I didn't know that there were stages of progression. I didn't know what to do when my father fixated on, he was constantly asking me where some car was. I didn't know what car he was talking about. I made it up as I went along. Tried to ask myself, what's the most compassionate answer here? And I'd say, I'll take care of the car, and he would move on, as opposed to, Dad, you haven't driven a car in 5 years. What's your problem, right? There was no training. And so that, to me, is the biggest challenge. There are a few voices out there, and thank God for them, including you, that are helping people understand dementia. The other thing, and again, back to the voices and why I think conversation is so important and your show is so important, is there's still a stigma. It was at first embarrassing to admit that my dad was in a psych ward. And then I was like, what the heck? Why am I upset? If my spouse had cancer, and he did, and he needed to go to the hospital for some extra fluids after his chemo treatment, there was no shame in that. He needed some extra fluids. But if my dad's disease, showed up in an aggressive way and they put him in the hospital, well, that was the disease, so what? It was just another symptom. And so I think there's a stigma because the behaviors can feel embarrassing, or why do they repeat themselves, or why do they move the fork when we go out to a restaurant a certain way, or, why are they talking about something that isn't a reality for the rest of us? Well, so what? It's a disease.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, too, I have had so many people deal with the behaviors and have their loved one go into a geriatric psych, and that's because staff aren't trained. Companies aren't able to deal with it. So it's not even just us. And I think sometimes we think it's just us, but it's the medical professionals who should be referring us to resources. And I mean, people are lucky if they get a number to the Alzheimer's Association or the Alzheimer's Foundation. I didn't even know either of them existed back in the day. I had no idea how many resources there were available to us, and had to find it on my own. And that shouldn't be happening. People should be given a resource and, or a coach, someone who can really stand by them and help. And that devastation of the geriatric psych has so many levels of devastation, from the person who's diagnosed to the family and friends. They were never like this before. Trying to understand it, trying to support them, and yet there's a stigma, like there is with any kind of mental illness, where there's this kind of shaming thing. Well, they should know better, they shouldn't be doing that. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. That portion of the brain's gone, it's been eaten up by little gremlins. And so I think you're right. I think education on multiple levels is huge, and again, being able to allow people a place to talk openly and get support. I think and there's a lot of different support groups out there. One of my favorites is like the Memory Cafe, where the person with dementia and the care partner all come together. Because I don't know if your family went through this, but I know mine did, where family and friends they inched away. And then the world got really small. And so being able to have that new circle of peer companions is really nice. Others that really know the walk you're going through, or the Facebook pages like yours, where people can really have honest conversations. That they tell stories in those groups they've never told a soul before.
Right.
And
right.
So that kind of being anonymous, yet there are these deep friendships that come out of these groups, and deep support because people truly understand. What are some of the biggest challenges you see the working caregiver, themselves facing?
Well, I think if we can just tie back to the last question for a second, I think that's another challenge around dementia, is because of the lack of education, and because many caregivers don't know what the path forward is going to look like. They can't adequately prepare their lives and set up their lives, for the progression of dementia. So that's a challenge, I think. And now I forget what the question was because I went back to the last one.
Oh, yeah. No, what some of the biggest challenges are for the working caregiver? What are the biggest ones they're facing working right now?
Yeah, I think the unpredictability of elder care. A lot of people put child care and elder care together as sort of, we look at the issues the same way. And while there are many, many similarities, and what you were talking about so eloquently a few minutes ago about the fact that, workers do have lives and we need to make space for that. But we can't treat it all with a blanket approach, because the thing about elder care is you never know when that call might come. You never know when a disease might progress. So it's similar but quite different. I think also from a child care perspective, in most cases, that's a very joyful experience. There might be a lot of stress around balancing care and work. There might be a lot of stress around the tasks that you do, but it's kind of steeped in joy and hope, and this is the future. In elder care, you've got these workers who are caring for somebody, and I think there are huge gains to caring for somebody, but it's challenging as you go through it, and you're facing end of life. And so we've got these caregivers coming to work who are not only doing a second or a third job at home, not only thinking about the huge task list that they have and hoping that they can make it through the meeting without getting a call and, not be the flake at work again who has to leave early or gets the emergency phone call, but they're also potentially grieving because, as I'm sure you know after your experience, and it's not something I understood until my parents got sick, grieving starts a heck of a long time before your parent actually passes away. Every time they exhibit, some characteristic or change from what they used to be capable to do, whether they're no longer driving or they're no longer buying you a birthday present. It's not the birthday present you miss. It's the fact that your mom isn't going to celebrate your birthday the same way. Your mom has changed. And with dementia, there's so much grieving of the person who was, even if you're able to accept the person who is. So these people are coming to work with grief. And so back to the more we talk about it, the more we challenge workplaces to understand that every single employee who walks through that door is on some continuum of care, whether they are parenting, adult childing, or whatever the word might be, right? They have spouses to take care of, or they're concerned about their elderly neighbor. We all have life, and it comes through the work door with us every day.
Yeah, that's very true. Or they might be having health issues themselves, because a lot of times that comes into play, with all the stress, and again, not being in balance. I know for myself, all of a sudden I ended up with acid reflux and asthma, and then after my journey was over, poof, they went away.
Wow. Yeah.
And so that was kind of bizarre, and I had no idea that was really related until later on when I was doing more investigative, stuff, and they're like, oh yeah, that's pretty common for different health issues to pop up. So, and again, none of us is the perfect person at work, at home, when we're caring for somebody, but I think we take on this role and we take it so seriously, and we strive for perfection that really doesn't even exist.
And there's no room for perfection. Yeah, no room.
Yeah, especially when...
And no need.
Well, yeah, and in today's world, we're moving so fast. Everything really is about spontaneity and being quick on your feet, and trying to avoid a disaster more so than anything. But that right. Doesn't mean it's going to get done perfectly. It's just not going to be as bad as it could be, in a lot of ways. And so it's kind of funny how our psyche, how it's been pounded into us that we should do this alone and we should do it perfectly, and we shouldn't complain and we shouldn't ask for help. Because to me, I guess I've learned we should probably do the opposite of all those things. We should ask for help. We should, lean on others. We shouldn't try to do it all. It's a very, very interesting state. It'll be interesting to see how companies pursue this. Yeah, because it does, and it's going to continue to affect their production rate. And if they don't find a way to be able to support people on this, I think it's going to have a big impact on them sooner or later. It's just a matter of time if it hasn't hit already.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe a lot of our turnover has to do with some of this stuff already, which so many companies are worried about in dealing with, not being able to maintain staff. Maybe some of it has to do with how they're treated or not treated.
Yeah, I think people view women or whoever leaving the workforce as a choice. They made a choice to go and take care of their family. And yes, in some level they did, but it was almost a false choice. They didn't see a way to make both work. And that's, if the companies are concerned about the, huge millions of dollars in turnover and retraining and, retention problems, then they would see that it is well worth the investment to look at why these people are leaving and look at what they didn't feel they had to be able to stay.
Mm-hmm. Well, and don't you think, and this is a little bit off topic, but yet not, I think a lot more men are starting to step into this role too. I know I've seen that much more from husbands to sons, because maybe there isn't anybody else that's willing to.
I think a couple of things are happening. Maybe there isn't anybody else. People are having fewer children, so there are fewer siblings and children to rely on to do the caregiving. I think it has to do with how rapidly our society is aging, so it's sort of an all hands on deck. I also think men are now starting to get, and I'm widely generalizing, but want to be more hands-on. They don't want to be the 1950s company man who went to work, came home, had his martini waiting, and wasn't hands-on. They want to be a part of family life. And so I think all of those factors, the split of caregivers is actually 60% women, 40% men. I happen to write for women and look at the issues that impact women, but in no means in writing the book Working Daughters, starting the Working Daughter community, do I want to imply that men aren't doing this as well, because the 60-40 split isn't that significant. And also millennials. 25% of the family caregivers are millennials. So it's starting to happen at a much younger age. And that makes me hopeful that as more people in the workplace are going through this experience, then businesses and society hopefully is going to start to say, hey, we've got to solve for everybody.
Mm-hmm. What about, one category we haven't talked about, but I hear this a lot, is the daughter-in-laws stepping in and being the primary care partner for the family. Maybe there's not a daughter in the circle, or maybe that those daughters are out of town, and then all of a sudden it's the daughter-in-law who's kind of the primary. And I've heard stories of that, and then they're like, everything's going smooth until a point, and then all of a sudden everything gets pulled back, and no one really knows what's going on, or they think they're not, and I mean, it can get kind of toxic fairly quickly if there's really not good communication. Have you run across much of that, where it's not an immediate family member but a daughter-in-law who might be working and then also being kind of the primary care coordinator for everything?
Yeah, and all of the issues you raised do come up in our community, fairly frequently. I think it speaks to the fact that we can't assume that one person's career is less important than another, or we can't assume that based on gender, people are, predispositioned to be the caregiver. Ideally, it has to be a family conversation, and it has to make sense for, all of the members of the family. I say ideally, and I sort of throw an asterisk up there as I'm speaking, because one of the things in writing my book that was really important to me and in starting the community was that it wasn't written for the Leave It to Beaver perfect family. Because at the time I was looking for help online, I found that a lot of the literature was, just sit down and have a family meeting and hash it out. Well, not in my family, you quick tempers rise quickly, or I tend to be bossy, or, it just, it's never how it plays out. So, but the point I'm trying to make is we can't default to the fact that caregiving is woman's work. It may be the woman in the family who does step up, or maybe the woman in the family who makes sense, but it can't be the default. The default has to be, who is best suited to do the kind of work that needs to be done, whose life is in the best position to be able to make space for that. And don't forget, the person who is getting the care might have an opinion about who they want doing those tasks and being involved in their life. So, it's different than child care. It's not like, hey, 2-year-old, you're going, here's your babysitter for the day. This is, helping somebody navigate a really interesting time and challenging time in their life, and assuming, no cognitive decline, they should have a say in that.
Definitely. I think that's a real important difference. I think also these family conversations that, it's so easy just to say get everybody around the table, but most families, in my opinion, are dysfunctional. I've met a handful of people that go, oh, we haven't had that. I'm like, count your blessings, because most people go through this, and in my own family, I saw myself as being organized, just real organized. My brother saw me as control freaks, little different in perception and how things went down. And I wish we would have had that conversation before my dad died instead of afterwards. Mm-hmm. Because, we got to the meat of some things, and, and I said, I'll take some of the responsibility, but I'm not going to take it all. Because you could have had this conversation with me sooner. So, in a lot of ways, it's an easy excuse. I think the other thing that can come in, and I've seen this with the in-law situation, is all of a sudden they're being, the siblings are being judged for not stepping in, and then an in-law is stepping up, and it's almost a pride issue of where the change is coming from, where it's being forced. It isn't that somebody has the time now or wants to do it, but there's some outside factors a lot of times I've seen, and again, not all the time, coming into play with kind of trying to change the baton or judge the work that someone else is doing. It wasn't even from the immediate family initially, but it was almost fed to them, and I found that's very interesting too. And I think we have to, as individuals, we have to be supportive in people's lives. And again, if we're going to truly be supportive, that's not judging their choices.
Yeah, there's no one right way to do any of this, right? Mm-hmm. And so the way your sister or your sister-in-law, your brother-in-law might be doing it might not be the way you would do it, but is it good enough? And is it okay with the person, who's receiving the care? And then, how can I help? As opposed to, I wouldn't do it that way, or let me take it now, because continuity can be important. But it's also, I think, if you are the primary caregiver, and, I'll be working on this for the rest of my life, but the caregiver who might be, or the sibling who might be long distance, they might come in with fresh eyes and see something you didn't see because you're living it. And so if you can pause, and again, I'll be working on this forever, but if you can pause and say, they're not criticizing me. They're pointing out something that I'm incapable of seeing because I'm too involved. It makes space for that opinion. Yeah. Easier said than done, but.
Yeah. Well, I think we're just so used to people judging us. We have that perception, and so we're ready to kind of be on that attack mode instead of really being open-minded and kind of for the better good. Someone's got an alternative motive, for what they're saying or how they're saying it, or why didn't they say it sooner before this went into play? Because they didn't see it either. Sometimes it can be really innocent stuff. And I think with texts and emails, it can complicate things too, because now you're not hearing the tone of voice, and if people can video conference and really be able to see the nonverbals of what's going on with those words, I think can make a huge difference as well. Well, Liz, this is really go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think I wrote in the book, be prepared to dust off the family dysfunction, because you're all of a sudden your inner 7-year-old comes out, right, with your sister, and you're like, she's looking at me. It's just it's such a vulnerable and important time of life, and so you tend to sort of sink back into those roles. So just be prepared for that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And a lot of times those roles, they just don't go away in some families. Right. They're just embedded there for life. You were the baby of the family. You're always going to be the baby of the family, even though you make 3 times the money and have a bigger job and house or whatever. You're still the baby of the family in what it is. You might be the attorney, but they're still going to get a different elder law attorney.
Exactly.
It's an interesting thing, and I think one of the things we have to do with life in general is just really use that phrase. And I know my folks used it a lot growing up, was pick your battles. And I don't think we pick our battles. I think we just go to battle these days. And we say things without thinking them through sometimes on how they could be perceived. And this will be a journey in terms of learning to, I think, communicate better, to care better, and to love at a deeper level. And help you prioritize what's really important in your life. And nobody can make that decision but you, with that. So thank you so much, Liz, for this conversation. This hour just blew by so fast. It just, it always does, and I'm not surprised. Again, Liz O'Donnell's book is Working Daughter, A Guide to Caring for Your Aging Parents While Earning a Living. And you can reach her by going to workingdaughter.com. That's workingdaughter.com. And right now the book is just kind of in pre-launch. So when are you looking at that actually launching, Liz?
August 8th, so very soon.
Okay, yeah, that's just right around the corner. And you can pre-order your book, so it'll be hot off the press. Any last words of wisdom? We've got a couple of minutes left. So,
yeah, there's one thing I'd like to point out. I talked about, the choice of shifting your attitude and remembering what you're grateful for and remembering to thank yourself. I do believe that, and I think it's very important. But I don't want anyone listening to think that I expect us all to go through caregiving like Pollyanna, like this is all wonderful and good. It is hard. And personally, I'm also, as much as I'm a fan of setting that timer to have a gratitude moment, I also sometimes set the timer and throw myself the biggest pity party in the world, complete with double stuffed Oreos and a glass of wine. I think it's okay to sometimes say, this completely sucks, and I'm going to feel sorry for myself and watch Netflix for 2 hours. I think the key, though, is to set a timer on the pity party as well, and then say, okay, you deserve that. So what now? What? Yep. And get up and go. Yeah.
Yeah, good advice. I remember going down in my basement after everybody had left the house and just screaming at the top of my lungs. I didn't want the neighbors or anyone in the family to know that I was just so frustrated and exhausted, and just sat down and cried, screamed and yelled, and then I was like, okay, I can move on now. I got that out of my system.
Yep. Okay, now I've got to go call, the phone company or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of the emotions that you had prior to getting into a caring situation, you're still going to have all of those emotions. They might peak and valley a little bit more, but you're still going to be exposed to them. You're still going to feel them all. So you still have to manage them, and and it's okay to, like you said, have those pity parties or screaming matches by yourself or yelling at God. I know I've done that a few times too. Just as long as no one else is getting hurt, and that you don't stay in that spot.
You don't stay there.
It's a phase. It's a phase. Emotions are fluid. They're meant to be fluid. So you're not going to be high all the time and happy, and you're not going to be sad and depressed all the time either. So just keep flushing those emotions through. And again, I love that tip of having some type of gratitude practice, and I think writing them down is extremely powerful. And that 1 minute talk before you go to bed, I did good.
Mm-hmm. I did good. Yeah.
Because so many times we don't know those. Well, again, thank you again. People can go to workingdaughter.com. Prior to wrapping up, I just want to shout out and let people know if they're looking for more resources, please visit alzheimerspeaks.com. We have tons of things on there, from our dementia chats, interviews, to memory cafes, and so much more, becoming dementia friendly. There is also a new survey being put out by the A-List, and I would recommend that you check that out. If you go to our blog, you will find that. Just scroll down. It's listed on any of our posts, along with the link to Memory Cafe Directory, which is just memorycafedirectory.com. Have a great week, everyone. Bye now.
Hi, this is Suzanne Newman, host of the Answers for Elders podcast and radio show. We are the North Star that guides you through the complicated journey of senior care with trusted experts in money, law, living solutions, and more. So join us on this station, your favorite podcast channel, or just go to AnswersForElders.com. Meet the Wayshowers who will help your journey go a lot easier.